and it has a bunch of stickers on it because I'm me. So I have my lantern that says "Get Lost" on it from a state park. I have a Harvest Festival sticker and my pro-ro crow, which is a crow that's holding a sign that says "Abortion is healthcare."
Amazing. I love it.
I had a couple of other stickers on it at one point, but they slowly chipped off.
Sad. My water bottles are many and varied. So I get a lot of them for free at Pride events and stuff. But my primary one is the Nalgene. That doesn't have any stickers on it. But also the water bottles that I do have, they tend to find their way into my car and they just have their own little colony under the driver's seat and they reproduce and make new water bottles. So I don't have one water bottle that I'm loyal enough to commit stickers to it.
No, like, well, I mean, this is my home water bottle.
Hmm.
And then I have another home water bottle that gets rotated out so I can clean them regularly. And then I have my work water bottle, which is like this, but like twice the size. So I drink it's because like when I'm not in the lab, I need to basically be constantly drinking water to make up for the time that I'm in the lab and can't be drinking water.
Hmm.
For those of you who are not in science, it's because you don't bring food or drink into a laboratory environment.
That seems wise. Seems smart.
But anyway, how you doing, Sammy?
I am pretty good. I had a decent day. I just ate a brownie sundae with Ben and Jerry's
Ooh.
tiramisu ice cream. It's real delicious.
Tiramisu literally means in Italian, it means pick me up.
That's cute. Oh, I love that.
Tira is pick me,
Hmm.
and then su is up.
Oh, that's adorable.
Just great because it's coffee. It's a pick me up.
Hmm. And this ice cream
Um,
definitely has a little tiny bit of caffeine in it. So
Excellent.
I'm extra fun.
That'll be great for the next couple of hours.
How are you doing, bestie?
I'm good. I'm, uh, potentially ready to get horny on Maine.
What do you mean potentially? What is the potential?
I think it really depends. We'll get into it. It really depends on whether or not, like, how deep I want to go into Helm's Deep. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Fandom Apprentice. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Ryn. I've read Lord of the Rings before, it was a big part of my childhood. And so today I am here, as I always am, with my bestie Sam
Hi.
to go through her first time reading Lord of the Rings.
Is today the official halfway point? Because I think we're halfway through Two Towers now. Unless
We are
I'm
not.
wrong. We're not. Oh, are we halfway through the first book of the Two Towers? Is that what I was seeing in the table of
We are
contents?
more than halfway through the first book of the Two Towers.
Okay.
We crossed the halfway point last time as we left Edoras. So we are a quarter of the way through the Two Towers.
Ah, yes, because I was only looking at book one because I forgot that there were two books.
Yes, yes. But do we have anything else we want to talk about before we roll into Helm's Deep?
I think just as a general observation, I was talking to my spouse about it before we started recording. And I was saying, yeah, these are two really fun chapters. I'm really excited to talk about them. I feel like I'm enjoying Two Towers more than Fellowship. And then I thought, well, that does make sense considering it was all supposed to be one book. This is just the middle of the book where things get
Mm-hmm.
exciting. So that's why it's more fun. Not that Fellowship wasn't fun because I enjoyed it tremendously, but this is, I don't know, it's escalating, it's ramping up, it's more spectacular. There's bigger and badder things happening. There's orcs falling every which way. So I'm loving it.
Well, and following the purpose of the podcast too, like you now have a better understanding of Tolkien than you did at the outset.
Hmm.
Um, and so, can like are more ready to dive into these deeper line by line analyses than you were at during an unexpected party.
This is true. And now also I'm a confirmed Gimli girly. I love him so much. And he features heavily in these chapters, so that improves them even more.
A Gimli girly. I have not heard that one before, and honestly, that's fantastic.
Thank you. It's not, this is my feelings for Gimli, who, because of species and gender, I don't think we can fairly call a gay man, but Gimli would not be interested in me. I'm not interested in Gimli. I just love him. I just think he's so great. So he's my little guy. He's my little guy and I love him. And I want to see all the stuff he does.
Yeah.
So I'm just obsessed with him. This is not a thirst-based adoration.
No, that will come for Aragorn when we watch the movies.
Yes, I've even from the little gifs I've seen, I've seen plenty. Yeah, that's fine.
Um, and speaking of thirst-based,
Hmm.
as we jump into this, one of the first lines that I picked up on in paragraph 2 is need drove them.
Hmm.
And how many times have I read that exact line in like a spicy romance novel? Um,
Too many. Oh God.
you know, it, listen, need is not it. I don't associate need anymore with like purpose. Now it's just
Mm,
smut.
yeah,
Now it's just lust.
there's a lot of phrases that are just completely in that realm for me now that I can't hear any differently.
They were fearing to come too late.
Mm, too late. See, that's I feel like not usually the problem. But sometimes people can be insecure about how long it's taking. So I do understand it from that perspective. But I feel like usually it's too early that people are worried about.
Well, and now that we've set the tone for this most epic of battles,
Hmm. Oh, listen, I have so much more. The amount of notes that I have about interactions that Gimli and Legolas had versus the actual fighting, we know where my priorities lie.
fair. They, ride south towards the fords of Isen, where they're planning on like reinforcing people who are fighting against Sauron, right?
Hmm.
And here again, I noticed, Tolkien and time and Tolkien and distance, right? We haven't talked about it as much in this book so far, but like he's still being very careful about noting where they are, how long all their journeys take, how long, particular pieces of the journey take, like where they are at dawn and dusk each day, um, how far they've come by noon, right?
Hmm.
What's the weather like in the morning? So this is still a focus of Tolkien's.
Hmm. Oh, that also reminds me just
Yes.
of other silly things that I was talking to my spouse about because and romance novels, so it's all coming together in my brain. I'm currently reading Something Wild and Wonderful by Anita Kelly. It's a sequel to another book that we had read for book club. And it's about two men hiking the PCT, falling in love, so cute. And Miles is really interested in doing the AT one day, which I think I've mentioned on the show. And so I've absorbed a lot of hiking knowledge from them, but it's not my personal cup of tea. But I was telling them, yeah, this so I'm surprised that this book that's just two guys walking around is so engaging. And I had to stop myself and go, no, I have a podcast about a book that's mostly guys walking around, so I can't I can't critique the PCT.
No, one of my favorite books is Bill Bryson's A Walk in the Woods.
which I think you've also mentioned on the show before.
which I think I've mentioned on the show before. It's just a wonderful, wonderful piece of literature
Mhm.
um, about a dude walking the AT.
Yeah, walking is great.
Walking is wonderful, but one does not simply walk into Mordor.
Is that line in the books?
No, it's not.
Okay. I figure we would have encountered it by now if it was.
Yeah, that's a Boromir line from the movies.
Oh, so
Um,
that's Boromir. Okay.
Sean Bean.
Because I've seen that meme 10,000 times.
Yep.
Now I know. All right.
Um, but on the afternoon of the second day, they encounter a scout who is like beaten and battered. But he reports that the armies of Sauron have come out of Isengard and allied with the Hillmen and the men of Dunland. And the Lord of the Westfold, Erkenbrand, has headed for Helm's Deep.
Mhm.
And Gandalf tells Theoden to ride for Helm's Deep. He's got something he needs to go do. And he kind of goes off. And then some dude asks Hama what Gandalf leaving means. And Hama says, basically, fuck if I know.
Mhm. That
And like,
I have the quote if you want me to read
yeah,
it.
if you want, yeah.
Yeah. What does that mean? Said one of the guard to Hama. That Gandalf Greyhame has need of haste, answered Hama. Ever he goes and comes unlooked for. And then there's another guy. Wormtongue, were he here, would not find it hard to explain, said the other. True enough, said Hama. But for myself, I will wait until I see Gandalf again. Maybe you will wait long, said the other. So they're just kind of saying, who fucking knows? It's Gandalf, man.
Well, but then he's saying, like, Wormtongue would know how to explain it. Like, are there Wormtongue sympathizers in my good, not Christian army?
I thought that that was a dig at Wormtongue for hating Gandalf. Going, oh, it's fucking Wormtongue, always complaining he would have some reason for why Gandalf is gone because he sucks. I think you could read it either way.
I think, yeah. But particularly for me, it was the maybe you will wait long
Hmm.
thing, where, I was seeing him as like not placing his faith in Gandalf.
Yeah.
But anyway, they head for Helm's Deep,
Hmm.
which is a gorge. And at the front of the gorge is a fortress called Helm's Gate, and there's a big tower called the Hornburg.
Hmm.
Um, and across the gorge, at Helm's Gate, there's the Deeping Wall, and a stream that flows down to Helm's Dyke.
Hmm.
And I know this is spelled Dyke, Dike, which is a ditch or watercourse, but I was listening to the audiobook. Um, and I'm a dyke.
Hell
So,
yeah. Helm, yeah,
uh,
if you will.
Helm, yeah. So I, you know, was trying to make as many jokes as I possibly could with that, and will continue to as we go through the rest of the podcast. Anyway, there's a lot of people fleeing to Helm's Deep, but the enemy is also headed there and killing a lot of people on the way.
Hmm.
And so, they're going through the night after the second day of riding. So they started in the afternoon, then they had one night and then a second day, and now through the night to Helm's Deep.
Hmm.
They happen upon orcs a couple of times, but the orcs run away before they can fight them.
Hmm.
Um,
And Theoden takes a minute to just mourn the loss and destruction that they're causing for just the regular people,
yeah,
and that they're burning homesteads and fields and trees. And we're not just talking about the grand stakes of empires in the world, that people are losing their homes and regular civilians are dying because of all of this brutality. And there's a lot of stopping and talking to guards constantly.
war is always worst for the civilians.
Hmm.
Could talk about your military objectives all you want. Anyway, they reach the dike,
Hmm.
um, and encounter gambling. There's like 2 pages where they're talking about, getting there quickly, and then there's, discussions of like, there's some um, exposition dump, but eventually they do get to Helm's Gate. and encounter Gamling, who is the commander of those who hold Helm's Gate.
Mhm.
He's an old man. He tells them that there's not a lot of defenders. They are too few to defend the dike, um, but they will defend me with their lives.
That's so kind of them. That's so
I
good.
know. But he tells them that 3 parts of the folk of Westfold now hide within the deep. And Gamling, I have questions. 3 parts
Okay.
out of how many? Like
Hmm.
3/4, 3/10? Those are very different, Gamling, especially when the next couple of paragraphs they start to talk about logistics.
Mhm.
Like,
And
this is important.
the 3 parts, just quickly, it's women, children, and old people are in the caves, and the caves turn out to be extremely important, and I didn't realize this at first, but as we go on, this we're going to have a lot more to say about the caves,
We
but
will have a
at
lot more to say
least
about the caves.
women, children, and old people are 3 of the categories.
Yeah, that is the question. Is it, all the women, all the children, all the old people of the Westfold, and then the Westfold men are defending, and those are the 4 parts? Are there, or is it, like a fraction, like, like when you're making a drink and it's like 2 parts gin to 1 part whatever,
Hmm.
right? That was how I interpreted it.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel
Um,
like a
but
fraction would be more equitable and would be an interpretation that allows women to do literally anything besides be in the cave. So, yeah, I'll take that. I'll choose that interpretation.
but they start talking about, like they give a description of the deeping wall, and but before that they start talking about logistics. They talk about like how much food do they have? Can they withstand a siege? We are both confirmed logistics bitches.
Mhm.
There's a quote generally attributed to General Omar Bradley, which is that amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. Uh, Sun Tzu said that the difference between order and disorder lies in logistics. And Napoleon's famous quote is that an army marches on its stomach.
Yes.
So Theoden like immediately arriving and then inquiring first thing basically about, it's like, all right, what are our defenses? What's our food stores like? That's just good leadership.
Mhm.
You know, how long are we going to last? What's our ammunition? Like, what's our food stores? How can we survive this upcoming fight, both, you know, with the means to physically defend ourselves and also with the means to hide behind the wall for a long time.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of really fully shows that like he's shaken off the influence of Wormtongue and Saruman.
Oh, definitely.
This is
Yeah.
this is showing the great king that we've been told that he is.
I really enjoy seeing kings in these books actually doing stuff because we've made our stances on monarchies clear as they pertain to the real world. And, you know, as you know, listeners being in the real world, monarchs don't really do anything here. They're just kind of figureheads. So I enjoy seeing a king who actually goes out into battle and does stuff and makes sure that people are taken care of and is a good and skillful leader. That's fun. That's the real fantasy.
Mhm. But anyway, uh, they ride in and prepare, and then we get a little conversation between Legolas and Gimli.
Yes, we do. So there's a big description of the Deeping Wall, which is very impressive. It's 20 feet high, it's super wide, it's in a good defensible positions. If you are someone who knows about war details, I'm sure it's very interesting. But Gimli is much more interesting to me. And he is vibing with this wall, saying how awesome it is. He's admiring the stonework. And he's talking about how if he had, quote, a year and 100 of my kin, I would make this a place that armies would break upon like water. And you can see him doing the little pacha satisfaction meme with like the little chef's kiss. He loves it. And there's a lot of water metaphors with armies in these chapters, which I really enjoy, and that becomes very cool and poetic later. But Gimli is just loving it. Legolas fucking hates it. He's saying, I hate it in the dark. I'll hate it in the daylight. I do not like it, Sam I am. This sucks. But you comfort me, Gimli, and I am glad to have you standing nigh with your stout legs and your hard axe. Sure. Sure, his axe, Legolas. Buddy.
Listen, I see, here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are many sword and spear metaphors that one can make pertaining to that appendage.
Indeed, yes.
Um, his penis. We are talking about his dick.
Yeah. If that was not abundantly clear.
But
Thank
I
you.
then was thinking about shape and
Okay.
if perhaps dwarves are shaped differently.
Oh, that
Um, more
just,
axe-like, perhaps.
and I mean, any way you slice it, that's going to be difficult. But I'm envisioning, the double-headed battle axe, which I don't know how that would fit.
I'm just mostly envisioning wider at the tip and then like
That's the opposite
narrow
of a flared base.
and then wide at the base again. Yeah.
You're envisioning like an hourglass situation.
No, but like I wonder if I could like draw this on a sheet of notebook paper and put it on our socials.
We should put that on our story. And wait, do I have any paper right here? It could be like reporting live from recording. I don't have any paper here. Tragically, I've moved most of the rustling items. Oh, I can draw it on my notes app and I can take a screenshot. We're going to have a little arts and crafts break while I try to draw what I believe you are describing. Okay, so let's see. What color is the most appropriate? Let's do purple. I feel like that's always a good color for this type of thing. Okay, so you said wider at the top and then narrower and then wider again. So that's going to be like, yeah, literally like an hourglass.
See, I'm thinking like essentially axe blade type. No.
Like,
that's
what?
that's a chess pawn.
But how would it be shaped like an axe? You're going to need to draw this.
I'm so sorry, listeners.
Listeners, please make your own drawings and send them to us. Drawings only.
thefandomapprentice@gmail.com.
No images, no photographs, no funny business. This is serious. But okay, and then what would the complementary appendage to that be? How would that go anywhere productive?
Maybe it's like a knot.
Yeah. I think that's the only reasonable explanation. That's still not axe shaped. But
No.
why not?
Why not? I hate it here.
You brought this upon yourself.
I did, and moving on from Gimli and his dick to the dike, because suddenly from the dike yells and screams, and it's because they're getting filled with orcs. I'd yell too.
Yeah.
Literally, it says suddenly from the dike yells and screams, and then a couple of lines later, we loosed every arrow that we had and filled the dike with orcs. Listen, sure, just give me a heads up.
There's some hot orcs out there. It could happen.
Yeah.
But I did want to talk about the beautiful scene setting in a serious way for a moment.
Please do.
So
let's be less horny on Maine.
Initially, I thought that the description of the rain of arrows and the thickness of the arrows falling from the sky was just a metaphor. But it is also literally raining. There is a thunderstorm happening during this
Mhm.
whole thing, which just adds so much ambiance. And then you just get the mud and the splashing and things just going everywhere, total chaos and darkness. And when I had initially read the line, I thought it was that the arrows were falling as thick as rain. They were as thick as the rain. They are with the rain. Everything is, it's the literal heavens breaking open to make this situation chaotic. And mhm.
My line of notes here says, "And it's storming because of course it is." Whereas you're so much more poetic about it.
I admired the artistry. There's so many good metaphors. There's water metaphors, talking about the orcs. They wavered, broke, and fled back, and then charged again, broke and charged again, and each time, like the incoming sea, they halted at a higher point. And the slow, encroaching, literal and metaphorical rising tide of orcs. That's Tolkien doesn't run out of ways to say how many fucking orcs there are. There's a lot. They're described as being like a field of dark corn tossed by a tempest of war, and every ear glinted with barbed light. Who thinks of that? Who looks at an army and says, hey, you know what this reminds me of? Corn.
You
That's,
know who thinks of that? A guy who has had a lot of time sitting in the trenches, watching the heads of his enemies across the no man's land, and has had a lot of time to think about it.
yeah, it's really good. And
Um,
yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to move on, but unless
Yeah,
you have
go
more
for
to
it. I
talk
was also
about.
going to move on.
Éomer and Aragorn, this is the hour in which they draw swords together, and they run on a postern door and attack the orcs who are ramming at the gate. And Gimli comes out with them,
Hmm.
um, and ends up having to save their lives because some of the orcs weren't, all the way dead.
Yeah, I read that as, I mean, it could be that they just weren't all the way dead and they were suddenly popping back up, but I read it as more of an intentional fake out.
Well, yeah, I mean, they said like they were creeping was I
Hmm.
think the word used, and so they were intentionally trying to catch them unawares.
Hmm.
Um, but Gimli had sort of like slipped out behind them, and he gives his war cry, "Bwrw Chazad Manu," which means the axes of the dwarves are upon you. Um, but he came out and sat down to watch the fight because the hillmen seemed too big for him.
Yeah.
The bravado of this man.
He's antsy. He needs something to do. And he talks about it with Legolas earlier too at the wall when we got distracted by his hard axe. That he's saying he's itching. He's itching to make some orc heads roll. He needs something to do. And so going out and watching the sword fighting, why not?
Yeah. But at this point, they go back in, and Legolas and Gimli start having a competition about who can kill the most orcs because Gimli
Hmm.
boasts of 2, and Legolas goes, "Ha, fucking casual. I got 20."
And this becomes an ongoing theme in both of these chapters to my immense delight. There's just constant, it's the comic relief of the intense battle. It's just checking in to go, oh, I got this many. I got this many. How many did you get? I love it. It makes me happy.
And here's where I don't know if I want to reveal some of the inner workings of my brain and how corrupted I am by
You can reveal it to me, and then if it is shared with the
mm.
listeners, great. And if not, then it's just for me.
So Gimli eventually gets to 21, but at that point, Legolas is like, "Good job. I'm at 24 now."
Oh,
Um,
my brain is now where your brain is. Please continue. I see. Yes, I
so
do.
I read this as a competition,
Mhm.
right? This
Mhm.
is a competition, and there are many things that you can do with counting ever higher. Uh,
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
read the interesting possibility of like a switchy pleasure dom scene. Whoever gets the higher count ends up edging the other one that many times before dawn breaks, shall we say.
And we shall say that.
And so, they keep trying to surpass the other one, but of course, the higher they get, the worse it's going to be later. Anyway,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah. I s As soon as your tone shifted, I knew immediately. Yeah. I mean, if you're immortal, if you've got a axe-shaped situation, who knows what the possibilities are?
but I mean, you could also, with this ever higher counting thing, there are ways to incorporate that into an impact scene. There are ways to include,
Mm.
there's many, many ways to make this work in some sort of sexual context.
I mean, listen, I can be right there with you. Everyone's watching, but nobody knows. It's pretty loud, so you're not going to hear if there are some perhaps unusual sounds being made. Nobody's going to know.
I gotta say though, that doesn't seem like either of them just because, like, you gotta make sure you're not gonna die
They're too responsible for that.
mid-orgasm.
Yeah. You don't want the
Yeah,
little death and the big death at the same time.
le petit mort. Uh, Neither of them are going to be the angel of small death or the codeine scene right now.
And this does then just transition brilliantly into my next note because I had been keeping
Please.
track of the specifics of what's happening in the fight because
Mhm.
I am the type of person who I do feel slightly bad confessing this to my sometimes DM. I do sometimes zone out during combat a little bit. It's hard for me to follow, especially in a book. It's just a lot. But now it's my responsibility to understand what's happening. So I made a point of detailing the highlights of this group of people is here and this group of people is there and this is what's logistically happening. And there's three big pushes basically where the men are rallied again and again to keep pushing back against the orcs. And so I wrote, the orcs keep coming and they don't stop coming because I was trying to do a Smash Mouth All Star situation, but then tied into what we just said, that phrase takes on a little bit of a different meaning and we can continue.
Yeah.
The orc report is updated. Gimli gets to 21, but Legolas is already at 24. So
Yes.
getting even.
So dawn is starting to get ever closer,
Mhm.
and Gambling is concerned that, the Uruk-hai don't stop, and neither do the men that they're now allied with, the Dunlendings and the Hillmen. Gambling, however, speaks the Dunland tongue.
Mhm.
Um, and he says, he translates the speech for Aragorn and says that the Dunlendings have never forgiven the Rohirrim for being given the mark by the lords of Gondor 500 years ago. And I went, oh, fuck, the Rohirrim are colonizers.
Oh no. Ugh. This makes it harder to love them. But they're complex. The good and evil binary is being troubled again, although, to our lovely British author, I'm sure that was not as much of an issue for him ethically, but for us, mm, can't
Yes.
can't support that.
But at this point, all of a sudden, we get explosives. Saruman has explosives.
Yeah, I wrote the orcs have explosives. Great. That's exactly what we should be given. Anytime, because obviously various forms of explosives have existed for a really long time. But I think that they have a certain jarring impact in a fantasy setting because they feel explosive weapons in war feel so modern. It feels so close to guns and bombs. And so I feel like it just makes the whole thing seem less fantasy violence and more real violence, if that makes
I
sense.
Yeah, I was immediately brought to my extensive knowledge of Tom Lehrer songs.
Hmm.
So Tom Lehrer was a comedian and musician back in the 50s and 60s, and he wrote a number of songs about nuclear war and mutually assured destruction. And uh, three that sprung to mind when all of a sudden we're now talking about like essentially an arms race in Middle Earth. Because
Hmm.
now that and because in the next chapter, Gandalf says like you can't erase the knowledge of what Saruman has put into the world,
Hmm.
right? And you can think about that in some respects, like with regard to the explosives. Once these weapons are in the world, they're not going away. And so I was thinking of Tom Lehrer's song "Who's Next," which is about nuclear proliferation and who keeps developing nuclear bombs. There's also the song "So Long, Mom." Uh, I'm off to drop the bomb, which is about you know how quickly a total nuclear war will go. The last line of the song is "I'll look for you when the war is over, an hour and a half from now." And then there's finally "We'll all go together when we go," because total nuclear war would completely decimate everyone on the planet. And obviously, by the time these books were published, the US had dropped two atomic bombs on Japan. And so by this point, Tolkien would have been familiar with nuclear weapons, their
Hmm.
existence. But also, again, as we've talked about before, he fought in the First World War when the tactics of warfare changed, when these weapons of mass destruction, gas attacks and such became more commonplace, right? They weren't part of commonplace warfare prior to that.
Hmm.
And I feel like again, that's him. He is this battle is an epic scene, right? But also he's not shying away from the fact that it's terrifying and confusing,
Yeah.
right? And um I think them encountering weapons that they don't understand but that they know are going to change you know the face of this battle, change potentially change the outcome. I think that's directly pulled from his own experiences.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's, as we think about the ancient parts of this world slipping away, and the loss of Lorien and the loss of all of the great civilizations that have risen and fell, part of that, because we are so far removed in terms of human history from warfare with swords and horses and stuff, it all feels very medieval, and we're so far removed from it that it doesn't evoke the same fear and trauma and cultural memory as guns and bombs and things that we're more used to. And part of what we're seeing slip away is this sort of fantasy style violence, fantasy style warfare. We're entering into a new kind of warfare in this world where you don't have the knights in shining armor and great kings on their white horses. You just have everybody fucking dying in the miserable, muddy storm at Helm's Deep. Because, like you said, it's the weapons. They're in the world. They're not gonna be leaving.
Well, and now that they have these weapons in the world, but they also have the magic and bravery of these kings of men, still got mutually assured destruction. And so Aragorn leaps down into the breach, as it says. And I am once again reminded of Shakespeare. And I know, like, a breach is a word for a gap in fortifications, but my mind was filled with Henry V, Act 3, Scene 1. Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead.
Woof.
And here in my notes, I say, like, the battle gets a little confusing, which, to be fair, is the nature of battle,
Mhm.
right? Tolkien, or not Tolkien, fuck. Legolas and Gimli get separated from each other.
Mhm.
Aemir is somewhere else. Some people, as the orcs, with their explosives, break through the deeping wall, right? Um, Aragorn helps people get back into the caves and then comes back to fight the orcs. And so, currently the defense has been split in two.
Mhm.
You have some who've gone back into the caves in the deep, and some have come up into the tower at the Hornburg. And the very least in the tower are Legolas, Aragorn, and Theoden.
Mhm.
And Aragorn and Theoden agree to do a cavalry charge at dawn. And Aragorn goes out and taunts the orcs and tells them that their father was a hamster and their mother smelt of elderberries. It's the other way around, actually. It's their mother was a hamster and their father smelt of elderberries. Anyway,
Yes.
any other thoughts on this section?
Yes. So
Please.
as they're getting separated, Legolas is asking about Gimli, and Aragorn doesn't know where he is, so he suspects that Gimli's in the cave. And apparently, Legolas really needs to report that his current orc total is 39. And I interpreted that as him trying to play it cool about his feelings. He's panicking about where his boyfriend is. But yeah, no, I just have to tell him that I killed 39 orcs. I'm not worried about him or anything. We didn't kiss before this. What are you talking about? Okay, bye. That's I was envisioning some of that energy just for my own cute little comic relief. And then during the taunting scene, there's this section where the Uruk-hai are saying, "What of the dawn? We are the Uruk-hai. We do not stop the fight for night or day, for fair weather or storm. We come to kill you by sun or moon. What of the dawn?" And that line just goes so hard. It's I don't really have more to say about it, just that it was really evil and badass, and I liked it.
Aragorn goes, no one knows what the new day shall bring. Get you gone ere it turn to your evil. And they go, get down or we'll shoot you from the wall.
Yeah, we get another Aragorn shining king moment that we've had a lot of before, but this is it's not enough. It's he the orcs laughed with loud voices and a hail of darts and arrows whistled over the wall as Aragorn leaped down. It's even his great, awesome, shiny king powers are not enough to turn this tide.
Yeah, they blow up where he was standing.
Mhm.
They literally there's a roar and a blast of fire.
Yeah,
Um, but going back to Legolas and Gimli for a second,
please do. Yes.
I have in the last 48 hours read the entire way through Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles.
Mhm.
And, I'm familiar with the Iliad from before that, but um, I'm just very much reading now Achilles and Patroclus onto Legolas and Gimli.
I love that. I don't know their actual mythological deal. I only know them from the smut adaptations by one of our favorite authors. But I'm sure their dynamic is very beautiful and epic and amazing.
I mean, in Song of Achilles, yes, and in the Iliad also, but it doesn't focus on them in the way that Song of Achilles, which is from the perspective of Patroclus, does. Anyway, um, Aragorn and the king ride out. Real quick, they talk about Helm
Mhm.
briefly. They use his name as a rallying cry. Helm was the last king of the first dynasty of the Rohirrim. He was, I believe it's the ninth king of the Rohirrim. He's of the line of Eorl. Um, And so, and he was the one who built the fortress and the Hornburg.
Mhm.
And so when the massive horn of the Hornburg sounds as the signal to ride out, they're invoking his name in the hopes that, he comes to fight alongside them.
Mhm.
Now, their ancestors are coming along with them to defend them. But they ride out, charge through the orcs, um, and charge for the Great Dike, where they see a couple of things,
Just a couple.
a couple of interesting things.
For
Include,
example, a big spooky forest that wasn't there before.
yeah, just overnight,
Mhm.
so much rain, a giant forest sprouted.
And I just read that as, okay, this totally ends, right? And maybe kind of. Ent
Huorns,
associated.
technically.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Erkenbrand. Gandalf returns with Erkenbrand.
Yeah.
Um, and just this doesn't actually like relate to anything, but Erkenbrand as a name just has the same exact vibe to me as the word pumpernickel.
Hmm. I can see it.
I don't know why. I think it's like the K and the way that certain vowels hit.
Might also be a synesthesia thing where you just there's a connection. There's a vibe on a level that I simply cannot perceive.
Yeah, but I'm usually more aware of my synesthesia.
True, true, true.
Anyway, Erkenbrand, I don't have the taste synesthesia, so I can't tell you if Erkenbrand tastes like pumpernickel. Legolas, however, can tell you how Gimli tastes after this battle.
Probably not very good.
Might want to shower first. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's been right. I don't know. The orcs go wailing into the forest and are never seen again, which is great.
Mhm.
Appreciate that from the trees.
Yeah. So, and that's pretty much the end of that chapter. That's the end of the battle, roughly.
Hmm.
It is a hellish night, single hellish night, where they have to fight off the orcs, and thankfully Gandalf comes back. Anything else for this chapter before we move on?
No, I don't think so. How about you?
I'm good.
All right, then pressing on. So the morning comes. The army is happy to have won, but they're more confused about the sudden appearance of the trees. They want to be happy, they want to enjoy the victory, but mostly this is very concerning. And more of our allies come back. We have Gimli the Old, Aemir, and Gimli. And the first thing that Gimli needs to do, he obviously has a head wound. He is not looking good. He's bleeding, but he has to tell Legolas that his total is 42 and he beat Legolas by 1. And Legolas isn't even mad because he's so happy to see Gimli alive. And then we don't hear from either of them for the next 2 pages. So we can safely assume they snuck off to make out. That is canon now, I've decided. I did
Listen,
check
the
to see how long it was between that interaction and anything else from them.
I appreciate your service because my note here is Legolas says, when Gimli beats his total, he goes, "But I do not grudge you the game. So glad am I to see you on your legs." And I'm sure that Legolas is glad to see him on his legs and very shortly would like to get him on his back, his knees, whatever.
They possess a stamina that us mere mortals can only dream of. I get winded going up the stairs. An entire battle and, whatever else they're doing, and then just going at it after it. That's a lot. There's got to be some wild adrenaline endorphin situation happening.
As I was reading this, I was thinking like, "Oh, all our named heroes survived. The only one we don't hear about here is Hama, but we will hear about him a page later."
Mhm.
Um, Spoilers, Hama does not survive the battle. Um, but he does appear to be the only one of our named set of heroes that doesn't make it through the night.
Mhm.
Aemir, though, Aemir praises Gandalf for showing up in the nick of time and was like, we weren't even looking for you. You're a powerful wizard. And Gandalf is like, I mean, yeah, I am, duh. But one, I told you I was going to show up. And two, I haven't actually done any magic yet.
And he and Theoden are talking about the trees, and Theoden thinks that it's Gandalf's doing and saying, "Wow, you're so awesome. You're such a powerful wizard. You made this forest appear." And Gandalf goes, "Ha ha ha. No, this is way better than anything I could have done. This rules, though."
And he gives like a riddle, a power that has walked the earth ere elf sang or hammer rang, ere iron was found or tree was hewn, when young was mountain under moon, ere ring was made or wrought was woe, it walked the forests long ago. And then my brain is ruined, of course, by the video from 2005, because the next couple of lines, Theoden asks, what the answer is, and Gandalf says, "If you would learn that, you should come with me to Isengard." "To Isengard?" they cried. "Yes," said Gandalf. "I shall return to Isengard. Guard." So Gandalf sort of tries to say goodbye, and Theoden is like, "Bitch, I'm coming with you."
I'm coming with you, but I am still old. That wasn't just a worm tongue thing. I am an old man, and so I need a minute. And Gandalf goes, "Oh, okay, fine."
Right. But he does say, like, "You don't need to bring too many people. I promise you we're not going to get into another fight."
Mhm. Gimli also, who still has his head wound, insists on coming along, and Aragorn insists that Gimli rest and let him take care of it a little bit, which I've mentioned this before. I just love seeing them take care of each other. I love seeing Aragorn tend to his people. So that's great. And while that's all happening, the men of the Mark go out and round up some of the hillmen and are very merciful. And I had a quote about that, but if you had anything else first, I wanted to
No,
pause.
please.
Okay, so the hillmen get a really good deal in this situation. So Erkenbrand is talking to them, and he says, this is kind of a long quote, but I'll try to make it fast. "Help now to repair the evil in which you have joined," said Erkenbrand, "and afterwards you shall take an oath never again to pass the fords of Isen in arms, nor to march with the enemies of men, and then you shall go free back to your own land. For you have been deluded by Saruman. Many of you have got death as the reward of your trust in him, but had you conquered, little better would your wages have been." The men of Dunland were amazed, for Saruman had told them that the men of Rohan were cruel and burned their captives alive. So, they, taking prisoners is part of war. It happens. But they're saying, listen, you're going to help us fix shit. And then as long as you promise not to do this again, you can just go home and it's fine. You were taken advantage of by somebody who manipulated you. And even if you had won the battle, your lives wouldn't have been that great. So hang out with us for a bit, make things right as much as you can, and then just fucking leave. That was a very merciful response.
I mean, once again, I return to that quote from Phil Oakes that I mentioned last time. "It's always the old who lead us to the war, always the young to fall."
Mm-hmm.
Look at all we've won with the saber and the gun. Tell me, is it worth it all? No, they don't want to fight. I don't think any of the Rohirrim wanted to be cooped up, trying to defend their homes and hoping that what they did would be enough. But hopefully that hopefully this goes a long way to repairing relations between the Dunlendings and the Rohirrim. Because in the previous chapter, I don't remember who it is, but one of them describes the language of the Dunlendings as sounding like the snarls of animals.
Mhm.
And absolutely nothing good can ever come from comparing any part of your enemies to animals ever.
And then after that, there is the matter of what to do with all the dead, which are described as, quote, heaps of carrion, unquote, that they don't currently have the power to bury or burn. And just as a brief diversion into my interest in death and death history, this is a big problem in wars, and especially in the American Civil War after the Battle of Gettysburg. So many bodies, way more. The American Civil War was a huge turning point for the American funeral industry. It is something that I drunkenly explained to a friend at a party because that's what you get out of me if you get me drunk at a party. But just to kind of visualize with some real world numbers. So, approximately 3 to 5,000 horses died at the Battle of Gettysburg. Do you know how big a horse is? Do you know how difficult it is to bury a horse? Just one. Imagine there's 5,000 dead horses and even more cattle and other livestock and all of these fucking human beings. And you're just a person who lives in the town of Gettysburg and suddenly you have to figure out how to go about your life. There was a great Ask a Mortician segment where she talked about it at length. But just to put yourself in the shoes of you're just a normal human being and this is your town where you live, that suddenly there are now heaps of carrion. How the fuck are you going to deal with that? And thankfully Gandalf does deal with it later with some help, but that's another consequence of war for regular civilians. It's incredibly difficult logistically, and I mean, we even saw this with Boromir too, to figure out what to do with one body, let alone the emotional impact or trying to figure out what to do with hundreds of bodies or thousands of bodies. That's and then to do it in a way that is even remotely respectful of the dead. It's very, very complicated and very difficult. And also really interesting to think about. We're really getting so many layers of the shittiness of this experience. But I just wanted to talk about 5,000 dead horses because that's a really nice tangible number. Because it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a tangible number, but I still can't imagine what 5,000 dead horses looks like.
Yeah, it ain't pretty.
It's it's like thinking about, as we sort of talked about with Tolkien, Tolkien's background, it's like talking about the casualties of the Battle of the Somme,
Mhm.
right, where he fought, which, you know, was it 3 million dead or something like that at the Battle of the Somme? A million were wounded or killed
Mhm.
in the Battle of the Somme, not a million dead. That's still a lot, though.
That's and the word wounded covers a lot. I mean, I think the First World War, if I'm remembering correctly, was also a huge time for innovations in plastic surgery because so many
Mhm.
people were just horribly maimed. So to say wounded is accurate, but also we're talking about really grievous injuries in a lot of these cases. So that's not a heck of a lot better.
Yeah, no, that covers everything from getting shot a little bit to losing multiple limbs
Mhm.
and, entire parts of your body. War sucks. Neither of us have any direct experience with it,
Especially you heard it here first.
thankfully.
War
Uh,
sucks.
but I think, the one of the biggest takeaways of this series that I think Tolkien is aiming for his readers to get is war sucks.
There's a lot of times where I struggle with my brain and struggle with my body, and the fact that both of those things don't always do the things that I want them to do in the way I want them to. But the one glimmer of hope that I get from that is if a draft is ever reinstated and they decide to include women for some reason, I would be disqualified on so many fronts. I wouldn't have to worry about it. No military's going to want me. And I'm thankful for that. Because Yeah, fuck no.
Anyway, they make graves for these massive piles of people at the Hornburg, for one for the Eastdales riders, one for the Westfold riders, and one for Hama.
Hmm.
The men of Dunland get a grave down below the dike. And Gandalf basically says, "Leave the orcs by the forest, it'll eat them. Don't worry about it."
Yeah, and specifically, he has a quote that's a little bit later on, where he's showing Theoden a big burial mound that he had made with the help of Shadowfax and some others. And he says, "Grievous is the fall of your men, but you shall see that at least the wolves of the mountains do not devour them. It is with their friends, the orcs, that they hold their feast. Such indeed is the friendship of their kind." Sick burn. Saying that the wolves aren't going to get your people, they're going to eat the orcs. And we will ensure that we give the most respectful possible burial to all of your fallen soldiers.
But before they come across those mounds at the fords of Isen, they have to leave Helm's Deep, which means they have to go through the weird forest that showed up overnight.
Mhm.
And Legolas immediately comments as they're going through that it's hot and stuffy, which tells us as readers that these are the Fangorn trees, because that's exactly how Merry and Pippin described Fangorn.
Oh, I didn't even pick up on that. You're right.
Right? There's several points throughout this chapter specifically where we get descriptions of things that we as readers have already seen, right? We know that like this is due to the Ents. We know that the characters we meet at the end of the chapter are like we know who they are, right? Um, but we are getting this, description as if we are riding with the host of the king instead
Mhm.
and know nothing.
And Legolas really wants to stop and listen to the sound of the trees, but Gimli insists that there is no need. He has checked their vibes. They hate things that go on two legs, and that's all you need to know. And Legolas suggests that it's actually orcs that the trees hate and not them. And he concludes that they likely came from Fangorn. And as we've established previously with Old Man Willow, I don't think the trees really know or care that much of the difference. We know that the Ents are sending their forces out specifically to, um, you know, attack Sauron and all the guys whose names start with S's and all that. But so they have at least some awareness of who they're trying to get, and they're trying to get the orcs. But I wouldn't get too comfortable with that, Legolas. I wouldn't get cocky when it comes to assuming that the trees will care that you're not an orc.
Well, and I think that's Gandalf's reason for being so intense about his prohibition on harming the trees in any way,
Mhm.
right? Because right now, the trees and the Ents see the orcs as the enemy because they've harmed the forest directly.
Mhm.
And as soon as a human does it, all bets are off.
Yeah.
Right now, the humans are safe. Not because they are on the side of good, but because they are not on the same side as the orcs.
Yeah. And then
It's a
after
very
that,
enemy of my enemy is my friend.
yeah, it's a delicate balance. And after that, we get a conversation about the caves of Helm's Deep, which is probably my favorite, well, the second favorite part of this chapter besides the very end. But I love it so much. I wish I could just read the entire page before I go off in my little Sammy rabbit hole about this. Did you have any thoughts about the conversation about the caves?
I have a little bit, um, but I will sort of get to that at the very end of the conversation about the caves. I have a little bit on the influences
Yeah.
of the caves. Um, But yeah, Gimli, while he was back in there, he saw these gorgeous caverns, right? And he describes them in detail, and I'm sure you'll go off on this in a minute. Um, Legolas, though, is like, "That's pretty. I hope you can see them again, but don't tell the other dwarves, because they'll ruin it." Legolas is learning, but he's still, like, mistrustful. He's still got his prejudices.
Hmm.
Whereas Gimli, I feel like, is starting to get it a little more. He sort of describes, like, you know, "Here's what, your people do. Your home is also beautiful," right? He insinuates that, like, the caverns that the dwarves helped build that hold, the Elf King's hall in Mirkwood are also beautiful. It's not as nice as what I just saw, but they're also, like, they're beautiful in their own right, and, you know, you guide these groves and these trees and these gardens. You'd never cut down flowering trees
I have
for
a quote.
firewood.
I have the quote. He
Yeah.
says, "No dwarf could be unmoved by such loveliness. None of Durin's race would mine those caves for stone or ore, not if diamonds and gold could be got there. Do you cut down groves of blossoming trees in the springtime for firewood? We would tend these glades of flowering stone, not quarry them. With cautious skill, tap by tap, a small chip of rock and no more, perhaps, in a whole anxious day. So we could work, and as the years went by, we should open up new ways and display far chambers that are still dark, glimpsed only as a void beyond fissures in the rock." He's saying, yeah, it's just because it's not a tree doesn't mean it's not beautiful, Legolas. Shut the fuck up.
Well, and also doesn't mean that it's not alive,
Hmm.
right? And we talked about this a little bit with Treebeard, where, Ents are made out of the bones of the earth, where we get sort of, again, an insinuation that the earth itself is a living entity,
Hmm.
right? And I think, it's interesting. We see the dwarves treating stone and treating, living rock as as if it's a garden, right? Where the the elves see, stone as inert.
Hmm. And I love the way that this conversation opens because Gimli is just going off. And I like to imagine that we're entering this conversation after Gimli's already been talking about the caves for a long time. I don't think this man will ever shut up about the caves. The caves and Galadriel, these are the only things that he wants to talk about. And I love that for him. But he opens by lamenting the fact that the men just call them caves. He says, "Strange are the ways of men, Legolas. Here they have one of the marvels of the northern world. And what do they say of it? Caves, they say. Caves. Holes to fly into in time of war to store fodder in. My good Legolas, do you know that the caverns of Helm's Deep are vast and beautiful? There would be an endless pilgrimage of dwarfs merely to gaze at them if such things were known to be. Aye, indeed, they would pay pure gold for a brief glance." And he is just rhapsodizing about the caves. And then fucking Legolas says, "And I would give gold to be excused," said Legolas, "and double to be let out if I stayed in." That's not. Read the room. Read the room, Legolas. Your boyfriend is trying to explain something to you. And Gimli does forgive him and then goes into what you said about how the dwarves built the halls of Mirkwood. And you like those. Those are pretty. These are even better than that. So you don't know what you're talking about.
Right. And Legolas by the end of the description is basically like, "Oh shit, I might be wrong. Also, I think this man is a poet and I think I'm in love with him."
Because Gimli is just so moved, and all of his descriptions are so gorgeous. Like I said, I wish I could just read the whole page. He also talks so much about light and the dwarven crafts of lamp making and light making, and that they're not just in these dark holes, they're sparkling and glittering, and they can create these incredible, I don't know, displays. I wanted to say vibes, but that just sounded stupid. And then I sent it anyway, so here we are. But they can create this otherworldly experience with the stone. if only they have the chance to.
Yeah. Um, but they make an agreement to go see Fangorn and then to go see the caves together.
Their little romantic getaway.
And I have one more gripe about Legolas, though, is like
Hmm.
Legolas, you already got to show him Lorien, so you should go to Helm's Deep first.
Yeah.
Because
And
the
also,
agreement is they're going to go to Fangorn and then Helm's Deep.
and Fangorn is kind of scary. I mean, it's cool, but it's not equivalent. If you're going to Helm's Deep, that's a better time. That's a better tourist destination than Fangorn.
Hmm.
Fangorn, you have to get real lucky if the Ents are going to be nice to you. If you're not a charming little hobbit, you're going to have a hard time. But
Well, the Ents like elves, so.
this is true.
But Gandalf gives them a name for the caves, the Glittering Caves of Aglarond,
Hmm.
which is Sindarin for Caves of Glory or Caves of Light.
Amazing. Cave of Glory also, that seems like that could have. Is that like
uh,
the opposite of a glory hole or the same? Who knows?
I mean, I'm sure Legolas and Gimli will find out. Uh,
I think they're too romantic for that. I don't know. It seems too anonymous, but who knows?
well, uh, anything else on the caves?
Not specifically. I'm just glad that Legolas is open to having his mind changed. And even though he is working on some of his anti dwarf prejudice, Gimli is patient with him and he does come around. And I love any little peek into Gimli's mind. I love seeing what he values. I love seeing what he thinks about. He's great. He's my favorite guy.
Amazing. So before we fully move on to the from the caves, I want to get a little bit cheesy with you for a second, if that's
Please. I would love that. I would love
allowable.
nothing more.
And let's talk about Cheddar Gorge.
Okay.
Uh, the caves of Aglarond are one of the few places, like in Middle Earth, that you can draw a direct line to a real world place. Tolkien specifically based Helm's Deep and the caves on Cheddar Gorge in Somerset, England.
I'm Googling it. Ooh.
Which, I don't think it's quite as glittery,
No, but it's
but
still beautiful.
it's still pretty. It is where cheddar cheese comes from. The caves are apparently where cheese used to be aged in the ancient times.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if I've had cheddar cheese from Cheddar. There's only one apparently cheddar maker that still exists in the village of Cheddar itself. Um, when I was in London the one time, I did have a few different types of local, like cheddar type cheeses that were, I'm going to alienate any British listener, not that great. I'm sorry.
Mm.
They were
Not as good as
so
Vermont cheddar.
mild. See, like Vermont cheddar is like sharp and actually has flavor to it.
Yeah.
And in my spin-off research I went from Cheddar Gorge to Cheddar the Village to Cheddar the Cheese to American types of cheddar to the Grafton Village Cheese Company in Vermont, where
Hmm.
you and I stopped on our little cheese tour last
Which,
year.
for the benefit of our listeners, we do love cheese so much that we went on an entire vacation, just the two of us, to go to Vermont and eat cheese. We are very dedicated to. We are also both lactose intolerant, but
It
we made
was,
choices and we stuck to them.
yeah, it was a great time.
I still think about the
um,
gay cheesemonger who sold us the cheeses.
oh, it was
He was
fantastic.
delightful.
Um, it was a great time with that. But Cheddar Gorge is, just this gorgeous formation that also has had human habitation there for literal millennia. The oldest, most complete skeleton, or like the oldest complete skeleton in England, was found in Cheddar Gorge, known as
Mm.
Cheddar Man. Um, And let's see, they've done all sorts of research and sequencing on Cheddar Man, um, DNA sequencing on uh, DNA extracted from his bones. Ancient DNA sequencing is really difficult to do,
Hmm.
um, but very, very informative. Let's see. And Cheddar Man, interestingly, despite living in Cheddar Gorge, had no genetic um, adaptation, according to his Wikipedia article, for lactase persistence, which is the ability to digest lactose into adulthood.
Oh.
So Cheddar Man would not have been able to enjoy the local cheddar.
Well, I think a lot of aged cheddars are lower in lactose, but
Well, and
that
that's
might also
why.
not have been his biggest problem living in
mm,
ancient times.
no, probably not. Anyway, that's the little bit of cheesiness that I wanted to insert there.
Thank you. That's valuable.
So I'll post some pictures from Cheddar Gorge on the social media for this episode.
Yeah.
They exit the woods,
Legolas
and
sees some
Legolas sees
eyes.
eyes.
Hmm. Gimli and Gandalf have to talk him out of going back to see them. Gimli says, I don't want to see any eyes. No, this is not happening. And Gandalf basically says if Legolas goes back, he will die and that it's not his time yet and they need him alive. So please do not go back into the scary woods.
Yeah. And 3 Ents come out of the woods. And we get, again, this description of them as the riders are seeing them, even though we know that they're Ents.
Hmm.
As tall as trolls they were, 12 feet or more in height. Their strong bodies, stout as young trees, seemed to be clad with raiment or with hide of close fitting gray and brown. Their limbs were long and their hands had many fingers. Their hair was stiff and their beards gray green as moss. Um, and, uh, you know, the riders are understandably apprehensive and a little scared until Gandalf tells them, like, they're just herdsmen of the trees. You have seen Ents.
Hmm.
Um, and it says, the king was silent. Ents, he said at length. Out of the shadows of legend, I begin a little to understand the marvels of the trees, I think. I have lived to see strange days. Um, and then there's a few more lines, and then songs we have that tell of these things, but we are forgetting them, teaching them only to children as a careless custom. And now the songs have come down among us out of strange places and walk visible under the sun. And Gandalf replies, You should be glad, Theoden King, for not only the little life of men is now endangered, but the life also of those things which you have deemed the matter of legend. You are not without allies, even if you know them not. Again, Theoden understands that he's come suddenly into the pages of a story, into a myth. Like, he understands the stakes. And we've talked about this before of various people that they run into, hearing these names that get dropped by the company and be like, yeah, dude, that's just a story we tell our kids.
Hmm.
And the company has to be like, no, like, we're literally walking with the One Ring and also the sword that was broken and the heir to this kingdom and um, 2 other members of royal families and also a wizard and
And when it comes to the Ents and spoilers later to the Hobbits, it's really humbling for Theoden to realize how little he knows of the world because part of it is the legendariness of all of it that's sort of unbelievable, but also just that these beings have been right there existing this entire time, but he hasn't been aware of anything beyond his own sphere of influence. And to realize that the way of men isn't the way of the world, it's just his way and his experience And the world is a lot bigger than that.
Mhm.
And he's going to have to get on board really quickly if he wants any chance of success.
Yeah.
And he's pretty open minded, to his credit.
Um, and this is where he says there's a line here that I sort of fixated on for a minute.
Mhm.
Um, where after Gandalf tells them that he has allies, Theoden says, "Yet also I should be sad, for however the fortune of war should go, may it not so end that much that was fair and wonderful shall pass forever out of Middle Earth." "It may," said Gandalf. "The evil of Sauron cannot be wholly cured, nor made as if it had not been. But to such days we are doomed. Let us now go on with the journey we have begun." And mentioned this earlier with regard to the weapons that Sauron is introducing to this fight.
Mhm.
Um, but also, I was thinking back to what our good friend Gungus brought up in our group chat that we talked about in a previous episode,
Mhm.
with the Ents sort of being representative of environmentalism,
Mhm.
right? Change is inevitable, right? The world will always continue to exist regardless of what happens in it, and the world will always change. There is no way to prevent that change from occurring. It is just up to us, as humans with so much control over what happens in our day to day and so much control over what effect we put into our environment, right? To uh, make decisions about how we're going to interact with that world and make decisions about how we're going to guide those changes, right? Thinking about this in the context of environmentalism, right? We are in the midst of a global climate crisis.
Mhm.
We're going to have some kind of climate consequence due to uh, the way that our governments and multinational corporations have treated our environment. That's all but inevitable. And it makes it really easy to fall into climate doomerism and feel like it's hopeless and we're just fucked.
Mhm.
But that's not the case. We can still do things. We can still build guillotines on the lawns of oil CEOs.
Mhm.
Um, we can pressure our governments at federal levels and at local levels to protect our environment. When you and I were growing up, right? I feel like we heard a lot about the hole in the ozone over Antarctica.
Yeah.
Um, Now, in 1987, there was a treaty in Montreal, the Montreal Protocol. And this was, of course, before we were born. Um, but as a result of the Montreal Protocol and subsequent revisions to the treaty, the ozone layer has been healing. The hole in the ozone was at its largest in 2006 and has gotten smaller every year since then. The treaty put limits on ozone depleting chemicals, their use in production. Um, and so, the possibility of a hole in the ozone layer is never going to go away. Like the chemicals that we put into our atmosphere that affect the ozone layer, that affect greenhouse gases, right? Those aren't going away, from our daily lives. But if we just say, fuck it, let's build the pipelines and dig the oil wells and let Sauron do what he's going to do, like, yeah, we're doomed and it'll be just as sad as Theoden saying, but we're not totally doomed, right? There's still things that can do and still things that Theoden can do, in his little world and in our world to change what this outcome is going to be. Gandalf's last line in that section is, "Let us now go on with the journey we have begun."
Mhm.
Right? They're not going to stop and sit on their hands and wait for this all to end. And even if at the end of that, the result is there are negative consequences, at least they did something.
Yeah.
At least perhaps they prevented worse consequences. Even if we are at in 50 years what we think is the worst possible outcome, there's still things we can do. We never have to stop trying to make the world a better place.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's my little
I like that. That's very helpful.
moment for that. Um, they pass by the fords of Isen, where the rivers run almost dry, and they find those mounds that you had mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
And Gandalf sort of fills them in on what he was doing while he was away. He found people and set some of them to make these mounds. He sent some men to guard Meduseld, Theoden's mead hall. So, quick aside, we're going to go back a little bit to talk about mead halls. We talked about Meduseld, which, if I remember correctly, literally just means mead hall. The mead hall was sort of the center of life, social and religious life, at least in like a Viking age uh, settlement. My experience with mead halls is mostly through that sort of like Viking lens
Hmm.
and Nordic religion lens rather than Anglo-Saxon, which is where Tolkien is drawing his influences more. But that said, there was, similar religious practices in these other Germanic groups like the Anglo-Saxons. And so, the purpose of the mead hall is largely the same. The purpose of the mead hall is as a social center and as a religious center. It is the place in which the king holds court. It is the place in which the king holds feasts for his warriors. Um, it is the duty of a ruler to provide for his people such that they can come together and in that social atmosphere can toast to the gods.
Hmm.
The purpose of a mead hall, above all, is drinking mead and drinking toasts to the gods.
Hmm.
And when I was living in Denmark, my Nordic religion class went to a replica mead hall. Um, that's at an archaeological site. And we're all sitting in there and talking about the purposes of mead halls, and our professors discussing like, you know, we had earlier that day been to Lyra, where Beowulf takes place and Hrolf Kraki's saga takes place. Stood inside the outlines of the mead halls there of the, what was at one point the Hall of Heorot.
Hmm.
And now we are sitting in a mead hall, and our professors, going down the line of us, like, what is the central purpose of a mead hall? And we're all talking about feasts and uh, community life and uh, showing your devotion to your Lord and preparing for war. And finally someone goes, to drink mead. And our professor reaches down into her bag and pulls out these two big bottles of mead and goes,
Amazing.
yes. And poured us all little shot glasses of mead. And our other professor gave a toast to Thor and Odin in Old Norse.
That's awesome. I love that.
And we drank a toast in a mead hall. But so when Theoden, a couple of chapters back, when he is freed from Wormtongue's influence, and he tells them that, his hospitality has been lacking. Gandalf, you were correct. I'm so sorry. I haven't fed you. I haven't given you something to drink. Like, that is his duty as a
Hmm.
king, to visiting warriors in his hall. That is the central purpose of his hall. That is why it exists.
Yeah, he's literally, you have one job and it is this,
Uh
and you're
huh.
not doing it.
Right. So him realizing that and saying, like, here, please let me feed you. Let me make this up. That's important.
Hmm.
Anyway, we are getting really short on time, and we have, you know, well, it doesn't seem like that much left in the chapter, a fair amount left in the chapter. But it will tie in pretty nicely with our next chapter. So next time we will finish up the road to Isengard.
We will find out how things went with the Ents. We'll find out what Merry and Pippin were up to. All
We will
kinds of good
find
stuff.
Yes, we will find out exactly what's happening at Isengard. So until next time, if you would like to see pictures of Cheddar Gorge, um, I will not guarantee that I will put a drawing of Gimli's dick on our Instagram. But if you would like to see if it's there, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at FanAppPod. You can send us an email at thefandomapprentice@gmail.com. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts and know immediately when our next episode comes out so we can finally finish the chapter. And you can, just to help us reach more ears and keep making this content for you, you can give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review if the podcast platform you're listening on allows that sort of thing. Um, Anything else, Sammy?
No, I think that's it for now. We could sit here for a long time and talk about more because these chapters were really fun. But we're old and sleepy and it's nighttime. And I want to give this 100% when we're fully awake next time.
Yes. We'll make it happen. We will see you all in 2 weeks to finish this out. Thank you so much for listening and for sticking with us. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
The Phantom Apprentice is produced and edited by Ryn Sam. Our music was composed and performed by James, and our art is by Casey Turgeon. This podcast is created for non-commercial entertainment purposes, and the opinions expressed therein are our own and are not reflective of the opinions of any other person or organization. The content discussed is the property of the Tolkien estate and is used here under fair use.